Hello and welcome to Cost Accounting. I am your host, Dr. B. Happy to have you with us today as we talk about relevant costs for decision making. Relevant costs oftentimes include the development of decision making framework in order to understand how relevant costs are utilized within the business. The first step to developing this framework includes clearly outlining the problem and its related unknowns or related variables. The second step, of course, is to identify suitable options and gather relevant qualitative and quantitative information for making an informed assumption as needed. The third step is to calculate the relevant costs and the benefits related to those costs for each option. And the fourth step is to select the option that makes the most sense based on maximized benefit to the organization and that meets the required qualitative criterion as outlined in step 2. The fifth and final step is to, of course, implement your decision. And looking at the decision-making framework, we can apply that framework to the business problems that we're trying to solve and how to supply more dog biscuits and using our earlier example to keep up with demand. This framework considers both quantitative and qualitative factors. In our business, we have more demand than we have supply. We're continuously sold out by Thursday of each week. So there we have some qualitative information. We bake all weekend and 2 nights a week after the work has been exhausting. But this is an opportunity for us to grow our hobby into a full-time business of making dog biscuits. An exciting business. So in our business, we've identified suitable options and gathered relevant qualitative and quantitative information to make informed assumptions as needed. Here we have our information and our options that we need to make. Option A involves increasing our prices, our sales prices. This will shrink demand, of course, if we raise our prices, we think. Option B is to purchase more equipment and increase our supply. However, there's a risk involved here. And the risk is the business owner is adverse to risk. So purchasing the new equipment is probably not a viable option. And the third option is to hire an employee. We have to make sure that the employee is well trained in the manufacturing of dog biscuits and maintains high quality of standard. This will, of course, take time on the owner's part. The third step in the decision-making framework is to calculate the relevant quantitative and qualitative costs and benefits for each of those options we just discussed. So based off of the analysis of this options, here are the costs associated with hiring an employee, since that would be the easiest option to expand the output during the short run. Of course, we could post a job for free on Craigslist and social media sites. And of course, we have to interview, hire, and train the candidates on weeknights when we're not making dog biscuits. So what are the relevant costs associated with working on nights when we're not making dog biscuits? Of course, would be the hourly wages, right? So there's additional costs for the new baker would be $15 an hour is the salary that we would pay our new employee. They would typically work 8 hours a day for 5 days a week. That'll equate to $600 a week in wage expense that we would pay to our employee. The employee can bake 8 boxes per hour. So 8 boxes per hour, there's 8 hours in a day, 5 days a week. That's 320 additional boxes per week. If we sell each box for $5, we've calculated that direct materials and variable labor are $1.25 and 10 cents respectively. So the margin for the extra boxes would be $1,168 minus, of course, labor costs of $600 per week, which is $568 in additional contribution margin per week. We haven't considered the fixed cost in the analysis because the existing capacity of the oven and shed means the fixed cost won't change. In other words, those fixed costs we consider to be sunk costs. They're outside the decision-making process. So we'll select one of the options that maximizes the benefit of the organization and meets the required qualitative criteria. We can make an additional $568 in contribution margin and in profit since the fixed cost did not change on a per week basis by hiring the baker. So therefore we can see the maximized benefit based off the qualitative criterion. As long as the owner can train the new baker to maintain the quality standards and the baker is satisfied with the work, seems like the right choice to make. So step 5 would be to implement the choice. Create the job posting, post it, and ultimately make a hiring decision. Then, of course, the training process. So let's look at the relevant information and relevant costs given a decision. First, of course, the relevant cost. Relevant cost is directly related to a particular decision being made now. Relevant costs assist in the decision-making process by helping to dismiss other costs, like sunk costs. And the relevant cost may change from decision to decision, so it's important that we may not be relevant to the next case. In other words, the relevant costs will be different from decision to decision that we make. So those same relevant costs may not be relevant in a different situation. Here we have different types of relevant costs: differential costs, avoidable costs, and of course, future costs. Differential costs is when the costs are different in amount between one choice and another. It helps us to narrow down our decision. Differential costs are also incremental or in addition to what's being incurred at the present time. This is important and helps sway decision making between two options, two or more options. Avoidable costs are costs that we try to avoid, right? Avoidable costs are present in both options being considered. Since our unavoidable cost is the present cost in both options, that doesn't help us to decide between two options. It is not helpful in the decision-making process. Therefore, avoidable costs are irrelevant. Future costs are relevant to what happens in the future. Since past costs are considered to be sunk costs and are irrelevant, it's important that the future costs that may occur are relevant to the immediate choice at hand. but any relevant costs that incur in the future are forward-looking based off of our options available. Some costs, as I mentioned, are costs that happened in the past. They are irrelevant to our decision-making process because costs that have happened in the past cannot impact our decision because they've already happened. They've been incurred already and cannot be undone. You can't get that money back. We include items like the past purchases of assets and expenses because they're relevant to making decisions in the future. However, some costs can be excluded from relevant costs. Relevant costs happen only in the future. So, in going back to our scenario, we're heading home to Nashville this weekend to study for our final exams. And we need to decide between getting a ride with a friend or taking the bus. Our parents offered to drive us back to campus, so the relevant cost is a one-way trip. Our friend said that we could ride with her if we provided her $20 in gas. With that in mind, we gather the quantitative and qualitative information. Our friend's monthly car payment is $312. The bus has capacity for 60 people, and the trip will take about 3.5 hours, or 3.25 hours. Bus terminals downtown, and there are 108 buses in the fleet. Friend's monthly operating cost for the car is $80. Bus ticket costs $27. Friend wants to stop for 30 minutes on the drive back. Car ride would take about 2.5 hours. So now that we have an understanding of the relevant qualitative and quantitative components to making our decision, we can now take the relevant costs into consideration. So, of course, we have too much data in making this decision, but it's important that we look at all the qualitative and quantitative information before making that decision to determine the best option. So the first thing we do is outline what we know and what we don't know. We know that we want to go home this weekend. We've identified suitable options based off of the quantitative and qualitative information. The choice is between a $27 bus ticket that takes 3.5 hours and riding with a friend for $20. The ride takes 2.5 hours. Other options to consider. Do we like public transportation? Is it too loud, too hot? Does the bus stop frequently? And how long does it take? Does the friend have bad taste in music? These are the types of qualitative components to consider. So we calculate the relevant costs and benefits for each option. There's a $7 benefit to riding with your friend rather than taking the bus. It's just $7 difference. 20 goes to the friend or 27 goes to the bus company. But we take the friend's music into consideration. Step 4. We take a look at it maximizes the benefit based off of the required qualitative criterion. Is saving time and money important? And the trade-off being the music choice. So step 5, make a selection. We're going to go with a friend and wear headphones. Excellent decision. The total cost approach. It's important to understand all the costs associated with making a decision, listing every possible cost for each option. We gather too many options in some cases, and the costs thereby making the decision more complex. With respect to the relevant cost approach, we take a special lens into consideration and omit certain costs, like some costs. We also call the differential approach because it's important to focus on costs that differ between two different alternatives. So now let's take a look at outlining 4 types of management decisions with respect to relevant costs. First type of relevant management decision is insource versus outsource. A lot of companies face that type of decision. Another is to keep versus drop. Do we keep a product or do we discontinue a product? Looking at the product mix, do we look at it with and without constrained resources based off of the capacity for production? Special orders. Do we manufacture a special order for a customer or not, depending on the relevant information? First, let's take a look at insourcing versus outsourcing. We look at the cost of manufacturing a product versus buying it from a supplier. This is known as the make or buy decision. It can be done using the total cost approach or the relevant cost approach. When we take into consideration insourcing a product, making it in-house, or outsourcing, purchasing it from a supplier, we look at a lot of different factors, such as timeliness of production versus the time it takes to deliver the outsourced product to me. Is there enough space in the factory? Is there enough area in storage? Is the supplier at risk of financial failure? If I outsource a product for a long-term approach, what if that supplier doesn't make it in terms of finances? They go out of business, right? Does the supplier respect the environment? Environmental considerations, of course, being very important. And does the supplier treat their employees well? These are all qualitative and quantitative considerations in making an insource or outsource decision. So there are 3 categories of this process. One is the core process. What is it that the company must control in-house and not outsource? This might include something along the lines of, we must control all financial aspects of our company in-house. Critical processes. These are things that could potentially be outsourced to a reputable vendor. The commodity process. This can be outsourced without losing competitive advantage. When we outsource, we release control or relinquish control. In outsourcing, we look at the outsource to the vendors or doing a joint venture with a vendor or the company owned overseas services, or if everything is in-house and locally managed. We call these degrees of relinquishing control. The most control, of course, is in-house and locally managed. The most relinquished control would be outsourcing to vendors. Of course, these are the variations in between. Let's look at it through a scenario. We own a landscaping business. We saw a green field in our yard. Instead of buying sod or turf from our vendor for client jobs, we can grow our own turf. We cut grass into long strips, roll the strips for transportation, and then replant them. This has worked for a while, but our competitors were green with envy. That's cute. Over time, we've developed lower back pain, which means we need another plan. It's time to consider outsourcing for the sod to our vendor. To see if this works, we've gathered some information, including direct materials, direct labor, and variable factory overhead. We've also identified some fixed costs. So here we have information. Plan A, of course, is to do it ourselves. We sell 30,000 square yards of turf on an annual basis. Our sales price is $3 per square yard. Our direct materials is $1.15 per square yard. Our direct labor is 50 cents per square yard. The variable factory overhead is 30 cents per square yard. Our fixed overhead is $6,000 per year for insurance and etc. Qualitative considerations includes knowing that we have a premium product because we're doing it ourselves. And of course, it has variable attributions. Plan B, on the other hand, this is where we outsource. The cost per square foot is $2.15. There's unlimited availability. And of course, we have qualitative considerations. By looking at the decision-making process, we take both quantitative and qualitative considerations into our analysis. And looking at the total cost approach, we can then analyze that information and making a decision. Here are our calculations using the total cost approach. Plan A, which is where we do it ourselves, direct materials $1.15, direct labor 50 cents, variable factory overhead 30 cents, total variable cost per square yard is $1.95. We have 30,000 square feet to work with. Our total variable costs are $58,500. Our fixed factory overhead is $6,000. That gives us a total cost of $64,500. For Plan B, we purchase by square yard of $2.15, giving us total variable of $2.15. If we use the same approach based off the total square yards, 30,000 square yards, gives us total variable cost of $64,500. Plus the same factory overhead that's fixed, $6,000. That gives us a total cost of $70,500. That's a $6,000 difference. I'm sorry, that is a relatively significant difference, which is $6,000 lower cost to insource. So given that consideration, if we look at just the total cost approach, it makes sense to insource. But let's take a look at the differential cost approach. Well, here we have the same information. Direct materials, $1.15, direct labor, 50 cents, for variable factory overhead, 30 cents. Avoidable costs, unknown. Relevant cost per square yard, $1.95. The volume is 30,000 square feet. Total relevant cost 58,500. Same data for the outsourced, $2.15, 30,000 square feet. Total relevant cost 64,500. Still 6,000 less to do in-house. So no matter which approach we take into consideration, is the back pain worth giving up the additional $6,000 in savings? Maybe, maybe not. Depends if there's a plan C, like paying somebody $20 per hour that will supervise. Let's take a look at the keep versus drop decision. This is where we keep or drop a product or a business segment. Fixed costs, of course, are avoided by dropping a product line or closing a business segment that will be larger than the contribution margin given up. Dropping a product or a segment means losing its contribution margin. When fixed costs do not change from one scenario to the next, they're not a point of differentiation, and they're, of course, not relevant. Remember, we do not consider sunk costs. Here we have an example. Our company manufactures robotic toys. One of those is a Robo Dog. However, the Robo Dog product line has sustained losses recently, and we're now considering of dropping the product. Our fixed costs are $110,000, with total $140,000 of fixed costs that could be saved as a result. Revenue and cost data is given. Of the product that we're considering dropping, our sales are 20,000 units, which yields us $240,000. Minus our variable costs of 120 gives us a contribution margin of 120. Our fixed costs are $140,000. This yields an operating loss for this product line of $20,000. What would the change in annual operating income be if we decided to drop this product line? If we drop it, of course, our sales would go down to zero. Our variable cost would be zero, which means our contribution margin will be zero. However, we still have some fixed costs remaining that cannot be avoided of $30,000. The $30,000 represents the total fixed overhead that cannot be dropped because we dropped a product line. We still have to pay rent. We still have to pay our salaries, etc. That will leave us with an operating loss of $30,000, which is worse than the loss of 20. So, although we're losing money by selling the Robo Dog, we're losing 20,000. It's better than losing 30,000. So in this case, we'll probably keep selling the Robo Dog. In business, of course, we look at other possible options. Reducing the sales price to increase demand. Look at other ways to save on fixed costs, etc. Product mix decisions. When we look at specific products and services, we look at how many to make, what we have in stock, and what we need to offer. Retailers' approach to product mix is the assortment of items that they can sell based off of a curated management decision. In manufacturing, we look at a product mix that we will be producing at the exclusion of other products. A service provider might use a product mix approach to determine which services to offer, which products might accompany those services. Products are often chosen to maximize contribution margin per unit, which then maximizes the company's total contribution margin in mind, which means it helps us to generate an operating income, in some cases even a profit. Here we have an example. Our company sells ice cream. We have different kinds of ice cream sandwiches, strawberry cones, and lemon popsicles. We try to look at this product mix to determine which products best match the company's strategy, which are most reflective of the market's tastes and preferences, which will best fit in a shopping cart, and which are easiest to source and will stay fresh the longest. There are, of course, resource constraints and limitations when it comes to particular input needed for production. This would include the short run. Managers need to decide how much of each product to make in order to maximize operating income. It's subject to the constrained resources. Of course, in this situation, we would select the products that have the largest contribution margin per unit. Here we have an example. Outdoor Power Equipment manufactures two types of lawnmowers. One is a riding lawnmower and another is a push lawnmower. Here's the following information. Riding lawnmower sales price is $1,000. The variable cost to manufacture it is $625, giving the company a contribution margin per unit of $375. That's a contribution margin percentage of 37.5%. Then we have the push mower. Sales price of $300. The contribution variable cost per unit is $200, giving contribution margin of $100. Contribution margin here is 33.3%. So we have two significant decisions to make. One is, can we sell everything that we make? And how does it determine which product to focus on? The answer, of course, is simplest looking at the production mix. If we have such a production mix, we focus on making more of the product with the largest contribution margin per unit. In this case, it would be the riding lawnmower, $375 per unit. What if our company is constrained to making 300 machine hours daily for production? It takes 1 machine hour to produce a push mower and 5 machine hours to make a riding lawnmower. We would look at the contribution margin per unit of the constrained resource, in this case, machine hours. In which case, we look at the contribution margin per unit and divide that by the number of machine hours needed to make each unit to determine the contribution margin per machine hour. So in looking at our data, riding lawnmower, $375 contribution per margin per unit, takes 5 hours to make. 375 divided by the 5 hours of machine hours gives us a contribution margin per machine hour of $75. The push mower contribution margin is $100 per unit. Takes 1 hour of machining to make. 100 divided by 1 is 100. Contribution margin per machine hour. So given the limitation or constraint in the calculation, we would want to focus on making more push mowers than riding lawnmowers because it has a higher contribution margin based off of machine hours, which is the constraint. What about special orders? This is where a customer comes in and makes a special request. Special orders are considered for perspective of selling a product or a service, and oftentimes also in manufacturing. We take a look at the short run, and it might be a one-off situation. So we take into consideration a type of decision-making tree. Do we have the additional capacity to make that special order? If not, then we look at the possibility of it adding additional capacity in the short term. If we cannot do that, then we would reject the order. If we can add additional capacity in the short term, we will calculate the operating income of the special order. If it's positive, then we would consider making the product and accepting the order. If we do have the ability and capacity for a special order, we would add in any additional fixed costs. If there are no additional fixed costs, we simply calculate it, and if it's positive, we accept. If there are additional fixed costs, we add those in, and if it's still positive, then we can accept the order. Here we have an example of a special order situation. Our company manufactures wearable headlamps. This is very popular in mining and in some cases for hikers in dark situations. Our sales price for per headlamp that we manufacture, our sales price is $10. The variable cost is $2.50 per unit. Our variable non-manufacturing costs are $2.70, giving us a total contribution margin of $4.80. We've been approached by a potential customer who'd offered us $8 per unit for 100 lamps instead of the list price of 10. The variable non-manufacturing costs would drop by $1.70 per unit in this case. Other qualitative information to take into consideration: we don't currently have them as a customer. We have not historically taken into consideration special orders. And we're operating under capacity currently. And we expect this same for next year. So this may be a good opportunity for the company. So in order to find out if it's a good opportunity for the company, we plug in the new information. Sales price, special order, $8. Variable manufacturing cost is still $2.50. Our non-manufacturing variable cost dropped to $1. That gives us a contribution margin of $4.50. At 100 units, that's a total contribution for the special order of $450. Given that there wouldn't be any other differentials or constraints, and understanding that it could be a repeat business, we would accept this opportunity to make this special order. Now let's take a look at how opportunity costs relate to the decision-making process. As you know, an opportunity cost is the cost that's given up based off of the other decision that you've made. So making a decision, we give up the cost of one over the other. The opportunity cost is the path not taken. Based up a cost-benefit relationship, the path that's not taken is called the opportunity cost. We will not incur these costs because we gave them up, chose a different option. We don't record opportunity costs because we did not incur them. How are fixed costs impacting decision making? We have direct fixed costs, as you know. This would include direct materials. Direct fixed costs that are directly attributed to the product line. This would include things like supervisor salaries, depreciation expense, direct fixed costs. If the decision is to made to drop that product line, the direct fixed costs are avoidable, typically. Making a decision, we would consider these as avoidable and relevant. Segment margin. Segment margin is we find segment margin by taking sales minus variable costs minus direct fixed costs. Very similar to contribution margin. It's important to understand segment margin when the company deals in segments. Here we have an example. Our company is divided into two divisions. Our projected results for the upcoming year include, for each division segment, operating income and loss. Management's considering shutting down one of the divisions due to a projected loss of $20,000. If the division's dropped, all $125,000 of direct costs would also be avoided. The remaining fixed costs would be relevant to their existing division that would remain. The remaining fixed costs are called common fixed costs. So here we have data for the two divisions. Division A, sales of $500,000 minus variable cost of $180 gives us contribution margin of $320. Minus direct fixed cost of $150 gives us a segment margin of $170. Minus common fixed cost of $70 gives us an operating income of $100. The division that we're considering dropping, Division B, sales of $360 minus $200 for variable costs gives us contribution margin of $160. Minus direct fixed costs of $125 gives us a segment margin of $35. Minus common fixed costs of $55 gives us an operating loss of $20 for that division. So should the company drop the division or not? Is the question. Let's look a little bit closer. If we determine that the company's better off by dropping that division, we recast the financials as a whole. Remember, the common fixed costs remain regardless of whether we drop or not. We just simply shift them over to the remaining division. So sales, 500 minus variable costs, 180, contribution margin, 320, minus direct fixed costs of 150, minus common fixed costs of 125 would give us an operating income of 45. So based on the logic and looking at the data that we've seen provided, projected operating income of 80 is now 45. Does it make sense? That's the situation that we're dealing with. So, T-shirt fit division has a positive contribution margin of 160, which covers the direct fixed costs. Although the segment as a whole is a loss of 20, the other division is a positive of 35. So as one division loses, the others doing it well. It would make sense that in the short run, to keep the division. Common fixed costs. These are costs of providing the factory's capacity and keeping the factory itself in operation. They're shared across product lines and business segments. Common fixed costs are still incurred even when one product line or business is dropped. Common fixed costs are not differential. They're not relevant in the make or buy or the keep versus drop decision if they are for the facility and provided the capacity to operate. They only become avoidable in the decision to keep or drop an entire outlet or location or to go out of business completely. Makes sense. Direct and common fixed costs look like this. Supervisor salaries is a direct fixed cost. So again, the supervisor's salary is directly related to the manufacturing process. Direct fixed costs include the depreciation on equipment specific to each product line based off of the equipment being used in the manufacturing process. Common fixed costs include things like rent or depreciation on a building, insurance, property taxes that support the factory and provide its capacity. The factory is a shared space. They don't just make one product line, they make multiple. So because it's a shared space, it's common and it's fixed cost. Allocated fixed costs are costs that are incurred at the head office and are allocated to the branch offices. Allocated fixed costs. Let's assume that there is $150,000 of non-manufacturing fixed costs incurred at the head office to support business essentials like the legal department, accounting department, marketing, and research and development. Those costs, of course, would be distributed equally and fixed to each store location. Since the head office does not make sales, we allocate them to the branches to cover the related expenses. Branch managers do not have control over what the head office costs are. These costs can be reduced by a corporate restructuring or layoffs, but are not avoidable. They're only eliminated when the company goes out of business. Allocated fixed costs. So what happens when we make the decision to close one of the 3 retail outlets? The $150,000 of fixed costs are incurred at the head office and not at the retail outlets. If the fixed costs remain unchanged by closing one of the stores, then those 2 remaining stores receive the total $150,000 spread evenly, which means that their new fixed costs would be $75,000 respectively instead of $50,000. Because remember, the allocated fixed costs remain the same regardless of the number of locations it being distributed to or allocated to. So in this lesson, we have developed a decision-making framework. We identified relevant information and relevant costs given the decision. We've outlined 4 common types of management decisions. We've explained how opportunity costs relate to decision-making. We've described the 3 types of fixed costs and the impact of decision-making. And that, my friends, is the conclusion of our discussion on this chapter. If you have any comments, questions, concerns, you can email me, call me, set up office hours. Whatever you need, I am here for you 100% of the time. Thank you very much for your time and your work. I appreciate all of you. Thank you.